Hey boys and girls, it's Miss Gould here. Today we're going to talk about rhythm and meaning in stories. Before we begin, let's discuss some very important vocabulary words. The first word is repetition. Repetition is simply repeating words. An example, I will do my homework, I will do my homework, I will do my homework. These words are repeated over and over again. So sometimes you have an entire sentence like this that is repeated, or you can just have a few words repeated. The next vocabulary word that's very important is alliteration. Alliteration, that's a big fancy word, is using words that begin with the same letter or the same sound. So look at this example. She sells seashells by the seashore. Try to say that five times fast. I'm sure that would be very difficult. When you have the same beginning sound, it is called alliteration. And if you see that all of these words begin with an S or an SH, so therefore this is alliteration. Let's practice with a story. So what we're going to do is we're going to read a short story. I'm going to read it aloud to you, and I want you to follow along. And we're going to look for the repetition. Remember, repetition is repeating the same sentence or the same words over again in the story. And we want to know, how does the repetition add meaning to the story that we read? Let's begin. The Fox and the Grapes. A fox one day spied a beautiful bunch of ripe grapes hanging from a vine trained along the branches of a tree. The grapes seemed ready to burst with juice, and the fox's mouth watered as he gazed longingly at them. The bunch hung from a high branch, and the fox had to jump for it. The first time he jumped, he missed it by a long way. So he walked off a short distance and took a running leap at it, only to fall short once more. Again and again he tried, but in vain. Now he sat down and looked at the grapes in disgust. "What a fool I am," he said. "Here I am, wearing myself out to get a bunch of sour grapes that are not worth gaping for." And off he walked, very, very scornfully. So, we can learn from the fox and the grape that the fox has to be happy with what he has. Instead of trying to get something that's not within his reach, he needs to be happy with what he already has. Now, let's look for the repetition in this story. So, our repetition in this story, I see several words that are repeated. Remember, repetition can be repeating the whole word, a phrase, or a complete sentence. And I noticed here it says, again and again he tried. So the words again and again repeats. Let's find another one, and then we're going to talk about how does this add meaning to the story. Down here you see where it says, and he walked off very, very scornfully. If you look at these two instances of repetition, the fox is trying his hardest, his very, very hardest, to reach the grapes. He even runs and gets a running leap at the grapes, but he fell short once more, so he couldn't reach them. So here the repetition tells you that he's tried over and over again, because it says again and again he tried, but in vain. Vain means, well, he really thought he could do it, but he couldn't, because he just wasn't tall enough. And at the end it says he walked very, very scornfully. repeating the words very, very here tells you that he's walking off very, very upset because he couldn't reach the grapes. And then he realized that he's wearing himself out. He's very tired, and he's trying to get a bunch of grapes that are not worth it. So this repetition is explaining a little more about the fox. Now let's look back at another story. This time we're going to look for the alliteration in the story. And in this short story, or fable, it is a fable, we want to look for the alliteration where the words have the same beginning sound. So let's read this one. The Heron. A heron was walking sedately along the bank of a stream, his eyes on the clear water, and his long neck and pointed bill ready to snap up a likely morsel for his breakfast. The clear water swarmed with fish, but Master Heron was hard to please that morning. "No small fry for me," he said. "Such scanty fare is not fit for a heron." Now a fine young perch swam near. "No, indeed," said the heron. "I wouldn't even trouble to open my beak for anything like that." As the sun rose, the fish left the shallow water near the shore and swam below into the cool depths towards the middle. The heron saw no more fish, and very glad was he at last to breakfast on a tiny snail. So just like the fox and the grapes, I think the heron learned a lesson that be happy with what you have. He was waiting and waiting for a bigger fish to come, but a bigger fish did not come. So the heron had to learn that if he waited and waited for something better, all he was to eat was a tiny snail. He needs to be happy with what he has. Let's look for that alliteration that I was talking about. We go back to our text here and let's clear these annotations. And let's look for our alliteration. Remember, alliteration is when you have the same beginning sound, and it has to be in a sentence or around the same area in the sentence. Now I see some right here where he says, "Such scanty fare is not fit for a heron." So such and scanty both begin with what sound? Good. They both begin with the S sound. And then here in the same sentence, we have the word fair and fit. What sound does that begin with? Yes, it begins with the F sound. So this adds alliteration to our story. Let's see if we can find anything else. If we look down here, as the sun rose, the fish left the shallow water near the shore and swam below into the cool depths towards the middle. So here where it says shallow water near the shore and swam, so shallow and shore both have the SH sound, and the word swam has the S sound at the beginning. Can you find anything else in this story? Well, if you did, that is amazing. If you look at it, we're going to learn a lot. Okay, we're going to do one more story titled The Ant and the Grasshopper. This time, I want you to pause the video. I want you to read this story aloud with your teacher. I want you to answer these questions on the side, and we're going to talk about alliteration and repetition. Also, the lesson that we learned from the ant and the grasshopper. The ant and the grasshopper. One bright day in late autumn, a family of ants were bustling about in the warm sunshine, drying out the grain they had stored up during the summer, when a starving grasshopper, his fiddle under his arm, came up and humbly begged for a bite to eat. "What?" cried the ants in surprise. "Haven't you stored anything away for the winter? What in the world were you doing all last summer?" "I didn't have time to store up any food," whined the grasshopper. "I was so busy making music that before I knew it, summer was gone." The ants shrugged their shoulders in disgust. "Making music, were you?" they cried. "Very well, now dance." And they turned their backs to the grasshopper and went on with their work. So our first question here, what is an example of alliteration from our story? Now remember, alliteration is beginning the words or phrases with the same beginning sound. So were you able to find any examples of alliteration in our story? Oh, I do see one right here where it says, "He came up and humbly begged for a bite to eat." Begged and bite both begin with the B sound. Anything else can you find? Good. Here where it says, "What in the world were you doing all last summer?" What in world and were all begin with the W sound. Anything else? Good. I saw this one too, where it says, "I was so busy making music before I knew it, summer was gone." So making music both start with the M sound. Anything else? Yeah, very good. At the end where it says they turned their backs on the grasshopper and went on with their work. All of those begin with the W sound. Several examples of alliteration. What about any repetition? I did notice this, where it says making music here. The grasshopper and the ants were talking, and the grasshopper says he was busy making music. Before he knew it, the summer was gone. And if you keep reading on down here, the ants repeated that. They said, "Making music, were you? Very well, now dance." So they repeat those same words back to the grasshopper. And that's important in our story because that tells you that the ants are busy working hard. And the grasshopper was just doing what he wanted to do instead of what he had to do. That's why we always work first and play later. And I think that's what the grasshopper can learn in this story. Is it's okay to do what you like to do, which in this case the grasshopper really liked to make music and to play his fiddle. But sometimes there's a time to work and there's a time to play. And the grasshopper had to learn that lesson. So down here, what can we learn from this story? I think that that's what the grasshopper can learn, and I think that's what we all can learn from this story, is you have to work hard before you can play. There's a time for work and there's a time for play. All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Continue practicing, and remember our key words in this lesson were alliteration and repetition. Have a great day.